My name's Rob Foster, and I am a SharePoint MVP from Nashville, Tennessee, over in the States, as you can tell from my accent if you haven't picked that up already. I'm here, like I said, for the sixth time. I would have been here all seven, except we had this ash cloud thing that seemed to have happened during the conference, and I got stuck in Nashville for that, so they shut down all the flights. Where's my accent from? I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a senior manager at a Big Four financial services company, not to be named, but you'll probably know where it is once we start getting into some of the demos here. As far as some randomness here, I also co-host the SharePoint Pod Show with Brett Lonsdale and Spencer Harbor. So we've been doing that for, gosh, I guess since the SharePoint 2007 days. So we've been doing that for quite a while. We're getting about 2 million downloads a year. So we're doing quite a lot of downloads and everything. I'm a retired author. I wrote some books back in the day. I guess my SharePoint book was the SharePoint 2007 Development Unleashed book. But I retired from that and became a baseball coach for my kids. So I figured that was a better time investment. And I also play in a band in Nashville. So I'm playing in a band called This Modern Station, and we are regularly playing around town and recording albums and doing all that stuff. Twitter handle is Les Paul Rob, so Les Paul like the guitar. Obviously this is the hashtag SBEvo15. So feel free to find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you can. I'm happy to accept friend requests or respond to tweets or whatever. So one of the questions I get is, where is Tennessee? And you get the map of the U.S. here, and this is California, and Texas is somewhere down here, and Florida is over there. But Tennessee's kind of right in the middle of the southeast section there, but it's right there, and we're known for things like Elvis and Jack Daniel's whiskey, yay. Country music, both types of music, I guess, country and Western, right? So we have that. Gibson Guitars is based there, and we're also known for barbecue. So I love to cook and eat. And so that's where Tennessee is and kind of a little bit of what we're about. So a little disclaimer before we get started. These opinions and guidance and all of this stuff that we're going to talk about today are my own opinions. They don't reflect my company's opinions or standpoints and all the legal mumbo jumbo that goes with that. So, if you go out there and you delete your farm or you mess up your farm, it's not my fault. So, So this session here is called Preparing for Office 365. I wanted to do this session, and when I submitted it to Steve, I thought it was a good session to do because we've recently went to Office 365 and wanted to share some of the things that we've done. And since this is a SharePoint conference, I'm going to focus mainly on the SharePoint side. So if you want to talk about the Exchange stuff or the Link stuff, ping me afterwards, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that. But we're mostly going to focus on preparing for SharePoint. And most of us, chances are likely, if you're here, you probably have SharePoint on premises. Is anybody all SharePoint Online or yet? Yeah, a couple. Some customers, yeah. So there's if you've got customers going to SharePoint Online, you've probably dealt with a lot of this migration stuff that we're going to talk about here. But I just wanted to give a quick overview of the features of Office 365, and then jumping into preparing for going to SharePoint Online as well. So some of the features here is really around 5 facets, right? That they wanted to offer. This is kind of the the guiding principles that they have of SharePoint Online, or Office 365, SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, and Link. So the first one is Office Anywhere. So being able to access Office from any device, anywhere in the world, share files, get to email, things like that. Any of these tools and kind of make them available through a laptop or through your iPad or iPhone or whatever is a key guiding principle. And you're seeing a lot of investments here with Microsoft, specifically around some of the stuff you saw today in the keynote, right? A lot of the investments in iPad and a lot of the investments in the other OSs other than Windows Phone or Windows OS. So it's something I'm seeing that Microsoft's investing in, and I believe that they're making a right decision on that, because that's where the people are, that's what the devices and things that people are using. They seem to be making a huge shift over to that right now, and I think it's a very wise choice. So the second facet is the email conferencing and collaboration. So enterprise class email, not Gmail or anything like that, but enterprise class email conferencing, so for link, for instant messaging, for video conferencing, as well as file sharing. That would be the SharePoint and the OneDrive piece. Enterprise social, so they've made huge investments in Yammer, and Yammer integration with Office 365 is very key, and that's one of the key settings we'll talk about a little later is whether to use Newsfeed or to use Yammer in your tenant. So it's definitely something that Microsoft's investing heavily in for the enterprise social space. And in Jeremy's keynote, he said that many customers are using Exchange Online, and they're either using SharePoint Online or Yammer. So Yammer is a very heavily used service that is in the 365 tenant, and probably almost as big as SharePoint is in that space. So it's definitely something. Anybody using Yammer? Right, yeah. Yeah. Personalized insights, so a lot of empowerment for business intelligence, not for like a traditional BI guy, but more like a business guy like me, to where I can connect up and create dashboards, look at performance metrics, and generate insights that are really relevant to me. A lot of this is around investments are around the product of Delve, which Jeremy showed again. So a lot of Delve stuff is using a lot of this insights technology. And also security and controls, something that weighs heavily on my plate all the time, given that I work for a global company and have to deal with different businesses, different parts of my business, both in the US, in Europe, and in Asia Pacific. The security and controls were key to understanding that and to really getting that to where it's a legal thing that we can actually use for our customers, as well as our internal office. So a little I guess, history timeline here. The key thing of this really is that as these things kind of bounce down, the private beta for Office 365, if you've been following the story, it's not really that old in terms of technology. I mean, it's really just a 5-year-old technology or 5-year-old implementation of the strategy. And so really, October 2010, the private beta was released. April of 2011, the public beta was released. And then June of 2011, so really only about 8 months later, it was publicly available, right? So I wanted to kind of highlight that to say that these releases of this product and this platform and the evolution of all this stuff happens at a rapid pace. And as we go down to here, they updated, they did some things with 2010, they patched some things, enterprises started adopting it, they started using it. Businesses and enterprises learned a lot. Microsoft learned even more, for how people are actually consuming this, how we should let people customize and things. And that fed into the 2013 strategy, right? So when they deployed the 2013 bits in February of 2013, basically, they created a whole bunch of new subscription plans around how you can use Office 365, and that's why you can go to your electronic store here and you can buy a subscription to Office 365, which has the client apps, the traditional Microsoft Office, as well as access to OneDrive, right? So they're starting to key that in to like the home plans, not only just the enterprise plans. So then, March 2013, Yammer announced, and they're going to, they implemented Yammer, offered it with SSO, and allowed for shared feeds and document aggregation. July of 2013, they introduced Power BI. October 2013, huge announcement was the unlimited storage for OneDrive. And that was a key thing for us, as an enterprise, to go to look at OneDrive as a serious option, right? Because I think it was maybe it was 1 gig. They limited you to 1 gig initially, and then it was originally like 20 megs. Then they upped it to 20 gigs, and then they went to unlimited, or 20 megs, 1 gig, unlimited, I guess, is what they went to. So that was a huge thing for us because it really allowed us to allow our practitioners, and we've got about 414,000 users to really use this as a solution for document storage. And then March, April of 2015, that's today, roughly. When I wrote this slide, I originally just had Office Delve because that was kind of the major announcement that had came out since then. This is just a high level. There's a bunch of things that have happened, right? But last week they announced that the groups in the video portal was live. So I had to actually update this slide, as did a lot of other presenters with the announcement that came out in the sessions you'll see, with the announcement that literally came out last Thursday. So it's rapidly changing, rapidly evolving. And that impacts a lot of the things, the way you plan. You have to plan for this stuff. Some of the benefits that we're seeing to move to Office 365, and I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, is IT as a service is one of the key benefits. So no more supporting any infrastructure. All that's handled on the Microsoft side of things. What it's allowed us to do from our perspective, and probably your perspective as well, is it allows our operations teams to worry less on patching servers and keeping those servers up to date, and let them focus more on the hard things, like how do we get users engaged and how do we do this. And I work in an environment where we have about 120 on-premises SharePoint farms, right? So if you think about patching that, that's a big deal, right? So if we were to roll out a patch once a day, every day, it would take 120 days to get our farms patched, right? So by that time, a new cumulative updates come out, and then assuming everything went perfectly, which it always does, we would basically just start from, we'd get the farms done, and then we have to start back at the beginning and repatch those. So that's something that was a major thing for us, and really allowed our operations teams to be more efficient in how they managed it. They're still managing the service. They're not gone. We didn't do away with these teams or anything like that. They're still managing the services, but they're able to work a lot smarter instead of having to do the dumb stuff, patching servers and things like that. So anytime, anywhere access, obviously we had talked about that, is the being able to access from the internet, from any device, is a huge benefit. Technical agility, to add flexibility and scale very quickly, and simplified solution deployment, to be able to roll out solutions very quickly and make that a model that scales with your users. And one of the things we've seen here is not being able to deploy code to the SharePoint farms has really made us think about how we deploy code and write it a little more efficiently and a little better. So moving a lot of things from web parts that were deployed to the servers directly into JavaScript, right, and into this kind of client-side model of being able to access and access the API that way. And rolling patch and feature upgrades. Big thing there is that they're always updating. I think last time I was in Redmond, I heard that they were rolling out patches to Office 365 once a week. So that's a huge thing to all customers. So patching the thing once a week, that big thing. So you're always on the latest version of code. Oh, in managing 120 farms, could you imagine how disparate that gets and how hard that is to get off version? So we found that as a huge benefit as well, to always be on the same version. There's some challenges here with Office 365, and I want to highlight this. It's not really something that's documented on MSDN or anything like that, but or TechNet. But it's some of the things we've seen is around things like support, right? So how do you change your support model to support this? Instead of your users calling your support desk and then them resolving the issue, you might have to make a call into Microsoft and into the Microsoft help desk. And I wanted to show this, and for some reason my desktop is not showing the, oh yeah, well, so there you go, cat's out of the bag. Yeah, let me see what's going on here. There we go. Let me pull this over. Yeah, so that's about as far as I can get over there. But yeah, as far as the support goes, there's a service health portal, and you can look really quickly and identify issues and see. And Microsoft catches a lot of issues and tries to resolve them before they even hit our users. So you can see a lot of these things are here, and there's no issues. And things like Power BI, there's something happened to Power BI, and they're restoring the service. So you can really get a chance here. And our operations team spends a lot of time in here just checking to see if things are right. You can also check on service requests. So when we do make a call for something that's broken, they can quickly resolve that. So the service requests are there, the service request queue. And I I don't want to pull these up because they could be proprietary. I don't know. So, but you get the idea. And it also kind of shows you the different types of things that are available. So things like Microsoft Dynamics or the Identity Service or Exchange, SharePoint or Live Meeting. There's all these different things that make up Office 365, and they're constantly, as they add new features, things might pop up there that you haven't seen before. So it's a good idea to keep on that. And Microsoft does a great job of keeping you in the loop for when things are coming out.
May I ask a question, Rob?
Please. Please.
Now, the support question you brought up, I think that's absolutely something you probably wouldn't anticipate. What sort of answers have you seen? What sort of models have you seen that answer that new support model question?
So I don't understand your question.
So you discussed that with the new Office 365, you might have to go direct to Microsoft for support.
Yep.
So an end user, you say you've got a power user out there developing something on the BI side. They've got an issue, they've got a question. What do they do? What sort of, how can you solve that question?
Yeah, they would still go up through the chain with the users. You're not going to have your users call Microsoft, right? So the question is if your users have an issue with, say, Power BI or something like that, how do you support it? Was the question, yeah. And so they would still follow up the same path, right? Chain of command of they would call it support desk, and they would try to resolve it, because a lot of times it might not be Microsoft's fault. It might be something the user's doing to, they can't get something connected or whatever. If the support desk does determine that it is an issue with the service, they would then raise the ticket with Microsoft. So you don't have 400,000 users with the number for the support desk every time it comes, they're calling. But we have a decision point, right? To say, let's check the service to see if the service is healthy. And then if it is, they help the user resolve that issue. And if it's not, they escalate it onto Microsoft. Yeah, so it's something we decided that would be good, and it was definitely a recommendation from Microsoft. Please don't give this phone number to everybody in your company, to do that. So yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah. So who did get the number? Just the admins, just the support staff?
The support staff. Yeah, the support staff would have that. Yeah. Yeah, so legal constraints. One of the limitations of SharePoint, the SharePoint service right now, is that you have to pick a tenant location for where you want your SharePoint instance deployed. And unlike Exchange, where you can deploy Exchange instances all over the world, right? So you can have one in Australia for the Australian users. You can have one in North America for the North Americans, in Europe or UK or whatever. SharePoint, you get one. And you can only deploy that in one space. So you have to really take into consideration, can we legally store documents out there? Can I legally store things in this data center because it crosses an international line, right? Does my company have any legal restraints or constraints on that? My company does, right? We've got a lot of client contracts saying that the data that our customers upload into the systems will stay in a certain bordered area, country. I'm thinking like Germany and France are big with their clients like this. So that's one of the challenges we've had, is that determining the legality of that. So you have to determine what type of sites can actually go into there. Site provisioning, how do you create sites? How do you deprovision sites? What's the policies around this? Are you still going to provision sites on premises for some time? And how do you run those off? How do you get those out of there?
Why is site provisioning under your heading challenges? Are you saying it's more difficult in 365 than it is on premise?
It's not more difficult, right? But site provisioning would be, the policies could be potentially different, right? For provisioning sites in 365. Traditionally, you would on an on-premises environment, there's a lot of tools that integrate with and have a site provisioning process. I mean, you could do it with like Nintex, right? So you could actually use Nintex or some kind of workflow that's built in SharePoint to actually go out and provision sites. Do you still want to have that power, or do you want to open up self-site provisioning? Do you want to? There's a lot of things with site provisioning that are a little more complex, because in the online instance, whereas on premises you could have had multiple web applications. You could have a site, a web application for your intranet portal. You could have a web application for your team sites or for your Power BI, things like that. Or for your BI stuff. Online, on SharePoint Online, you get one web app, right? So how do you break that up to where it's logical, so you don't just have a big bucket of sites and you have no idea what they are. The thing that we're looking at is being able to log that. Who's the site owner? When we have a site request in provisioning, who's the site owner? How long do we anticipate this site to be live, right? Does it go away or does it stay around forever? Things that you wouldn't normally, that I don't see a lot of people, you should be doing on premises, but I don't see a lot of business, a lot of companies doing that. But things that you really have to consider when going online for the site lifecycle policies and things for doing that, because they're literally going to be in a bucket. They're going to be in a single bucket. And as they go across like countries, right? How do you classify that and how do you segregate those out into different types of buckets? Because eventually SharePoint, and I'm just saying this because I'm assuming SharePoint will be able to, at some point in the future, distant future, be able to be offered in multiple geographic locations, right? And at some point you would want to move all of the European sites to the European instance, the American sites to the American instance, and the Australian sites to the Asia Pacific, or whatever. So just things to think about in site provisioning, right? It's a little different, but it's the same concept and things you should be doing as a best practice, but not a lot of folks are. Not a lot.
Do you still get the single site collection, or is it now multiple?
You get multiple. You can create multiple site collections, but it's in one web app, right?
Can I just the difference? Sorry, no, go ahead. I was going to say there's a difference between sites and webs, right? So although you've only got one web application, as an admin you can make the site collections, and then lower down you can decide who's got governance over them, and they can create webs under there.
Exactly. They can create subsites under there. Yeah. So the highest level is the site collection. And then from there, you would have a site collection administrator. And that's what we're doing is that, whereas before we would have potentially maybe like a farm administrator, right? And then they would do the site collection creation and all that. We have a little more controlled instance of that, right? And then the highest level our internal customers would get would be site collection admin. And then from there, they would create subsites and all of that.
So Rob, I just wanted to make a point. I'm just wondering whether or not you would agree with this, that if the challenge is not so much the site provisioning for the site administrator, it's much more the user adoption through Microsoft Office. So for example, in Microsoft Project, you are able to provision a site automatically from Microsoft Project. And that's the same that's going to happen to most other Microsoft products that allows you to create site collections or sites directly from Office.
Yep.
So the challenge is not so much site provisioning through Office 365, it's the provisioning of sites through Office into 365, and how do you control that?
Yeah, it could be. So I guess the question was around, is the site provisioning challenge around creating subsites through Office 365 or through Office itself? And I would say it would be both, right? It would be more around the user's ability, because they do have a lot of freedom to create site collections. You can turn that off if you disable self-service site creation, right? So you can disable that, but that's yet another inlet for that, right? So it could be a site provisioning process. It could be done through Office, the Office client itself. User experience, a little different there. So you've got a much different user experience as far as what you can customize and how you customize Office 365. So that's something that drives not only your look and feel of your SharePoint sites, but it also drives the capabilities you can offer your users and how far you want to customize it. Because at the end of the day, there's a JavaScript model and there's client-side object model for through JavaScript and REST and all of that stuff. You can make it as extensible as you are, as extended as you want, and you can really enhance the user interface, but it's just a little different. So your coders, your developers that are actually writing this code might have to think about development in SharePoint radically different than they did in 2013 on premises. Because they have to learn JavaScript. They have to use that. And they probably already know JavaScript, but that's pretty much, they're going to be JavaScript developers from that. Yeah. So, and then the content lifecycle. So not only the site lifecycle, but how often do you want the content to go? Because you somewhat have a limited space of content available in 365. And you can always buy more, but things like as you're publishing websites or you're publishing documents, how long, what policies do you need to interact to make sure that content lives appropriately, an appropriate time span? So as far as like preparing for this, There's really one word that comes to mind, and I can't think of that word. What would that be that we need to really start preparing for? Somebody say migration? Yes. Yeah. So chances are likely if you're moving up to SharePoint Online, you've probably got some content. There's one instance I've ever seen that there's no content been upgraded, and that's really my dad is a small business owner, and he was like, "So I'm thinking about buying a server, and can you help me do this?" And I was like, "Yeah. What are you trying to do?" He's like, "Well, I want to store documents, and I kind of want to have an email, and I want to maybe have some instant messenger with my team." And I was like, you know what I do, right? So there's this thing called Office 365, and so there was no content and no migration for that, but he was a very small business. So, as far as migration goes, the technology or the technical piece of migration is the easy part. The hard part is being able to classify where your sites go and what is the end result? What is the end result? Where are we going with this, right? So if you look on the left side here, we've got the current on-premises stuff that might exist in your infrastructure here. So you've got team sites, portal sites, extranets, maybe some platinum portals or some records management or whatever. And then the future state, where do we want to take these? Do we want it to go to SharePoint Online? Can it go to SharePoint Online? Or do we have to also keep an on-premises instance of whatever's next, whether it's 2013 or 2016? And then what shared services are going to be shared across these features? So this is huge, and this is a huge classification of your sites, because what you end up having to do, unfortunately, is you have to take a look at every site collection that's out there in your infrastructure. So that's a huge thing, and being able to map that and doing a quick mapping of, yes, this is a good candidate for SharePoint Online. This is a good candidate for keeping on premises because it could be legal constraints or whatever, an overly customized portal that we're going to have to re-architect. So that's a huge thing, and definitely something you have to think about, and you have to really carefully consider because it will drive how you migrate your content as well as how you communicate with your users. Because that communication plan for going from SharePoint on-premises to SharePoint on-premises is a different thing altogether than going from SharePoint on-premises to SharePoint Online. So what you have to do is and this takes more time than migration, is actually migrate sites, is gather as much information as possible about whatever's out there in your farm today. A lot of the preparing for migration is this. And it's both a combination of technical data and business data. So the technical data are things like, who are the site owners? When was the site last accessed, or when was it last modified? Has it been modified in the past year or 6 months or 2 months? What's the size of the site? Are there any large lists or libraries, any customizations, any workflows? And all of that stuff's fairly easy to extract with PowerShell. You can get that pretty quickly. You can just run a loop and loop your sites and your webs and your sites and get that. The business side of this, once you have that data, filling out the spreadsheets, because you're going to dump it to like a spreadsheet or whatever, and then you give it to your business teams. Is this site still required? Are there any business critical dates for the site that's coming up? So are you going in my firm, we might be going into busy season, so we can't delete this site, or we can't move this site. We might not be able to migrate until after tax season, for example. So who should be involved with validating the site migration? And has there been any customizations in SharePoint Designer? So all this feeds into that and what it requires the business teams to do, and you might be part of the business team as well as the technical team. It requires you to reach out to every site owner and determine this. And it's very tedious. It's a very tedious process to collect all that information. Now, here's an example of an extract that I did with some data that's been kind of scrubbed so that we can see this. But this is an actual extract that I did from a migration, very simple migration. But basically it has things like the site collection title, the URL, how big it is, the creation date, when it was last modified, what type of web it is, and the site collection administrators. And what this does is it gives us the basic information to understand what's out there, right? How big are things that are out there? Who owns it? Do they still work here? Right? Have they left the firm? Things like that. And when you have hundreds or thousands of sites, this is a big list. I just kind of cut the top 9 there. But So that's really what the technical data is, and all of that feeds into the business side of things. So you would work with the business users to help fill these out. So the content owner of this site, which is all me, I would actually go in here and say, yes, okay, this has got some SharePoint Designer workflows. It's a heavily customized site, or maybe it's out of the box, or hey, the person that really owns this site doesn't really work here anymore and it hasn't been used, and things like that. So you can see that some of these sites are most of them have been used. There's one that hasn't really been used since like February, so it's kind of, maybe we could make a decision on that one to say, you know what, if it hasn't really been accessed since February, maybe that site's not useful anymore, and we can reach out to the content owners and say, do we need to migrate this, or can we just archive it or delete it? So it really can feed into that. So are your sites ready for Office 365? So you're really coming to want to come to this conclusion. What sites are available for 365? So can the sites be migrated? Sites that may need to be migrated to may need to go to an interim 2013 farm. So that you can at least stage them up, right? You might have sites is anybody running in 2007? SharePoint 2007? Yeah, probably some of your customers. Yeah, 2010. You might need to, because of the way you had to customize your sites, you might need to pre-migrate them to 2010 or 2013 before you go to SharePoint Online, right? Then the things you have to determine there are all the customizations that were done to that farm. Do they migrate to the next version? Because some web parts in 2007 weren't released for 2010, and some web parts for 2010 weren't released for 2013. So there's a lot of things you have to consider, and you'll know pretty quick. I mean, when you start really attaching content databases to these new farms to do the upgrades, you get a lot of errors really quick, and it'll tell you, hey, there's a dependency here, and you go research this vendor that went out of business 8 years ago, and there's just no way to migrate. So without doing some complex tricks there. And determine how many features will map, obviously, and then develop the communications plan. And this is the big piece. Is like I said, the technology's easy. You can find out real quick what will migrate and what won't. But you might have a site that's maybe out of the box that can migrate pretty easily, but there could be some business constraint on there because that user is doing something with their team that's dependent on that site for a certain time span that it can't migrate for some time. So again, I want to call back to this slide and really kind of say, as you start advancing through your discussions with your users, things might change, right? And I literally had a flag on the end of the Excel spreadsheet. Is it a checkbox? It's is online, is not online, whatever. And it would just sites would fall up as to kind of where they would go. And as you talk to your users and you understand more and more about your sites, you'll be able to determine that. But it's definitely something that's ever changing as these discussions evolve. It's something that's, you might have a gut feeling, but you never know when a practitioner or whatever has cracked open a SharePoint Designer and gone crazy with their site, and it could put you in an interesting situation. So as these discussions are happening, what we end up doing is looking at the options and categories for how you categorize these sites. And the first option is maybe you start fresh. Maybe you look at your sites and you say, you know what, these sites, they've got a finite lifespan. They might be dying off or whatever. Maybe what we do is we say, okay, let's just start provisioning new sites over in SharePoint Online, and we'll let these old sites just die off over a period of a year or whatever time span. And that's obviously the easiest. There's not really a migration, right? But there are instances for that, right? Where you have sites that maybe they're project sites, right? Maybe they're sites that after the project's over, that nobody ever uses the site anyway, and you just start with the new, and you start fresh from there. So it's also ideal if you're, like I said, archiving or closing sites. Okay. The second one is a forklift model. So let's just take this site, maybe it's an out-of-the-box site, and let's move it as is. Let's take it from SharePoint 2013, and let's move it to SharePoint Online. So This is ideal when you have basic sites. You don't have a lot of customizations. There's not a lot of web parts out there. Those sites do exist. I've seen them out there. And the forklift migration is really the biggest thing you have to deal with when you're going to SharePoint Online is the URL will change, right? So your URL of your sites, whatever it is at contoso.com or whatever your company might be, the URL will change to something. It might be a custom URL if you're a dedicated customer or a more advanced tenant, or it could be something on Microsoft.com. So your URL will change, which means that if users have linked documents to that site, the old site, you have to do some things to redirect those links or change them in either the documents or the reference links for that. So it's as you move more into the customization, the customized piece, you somewhat lose this option because things end up breaking, right? Your migrations won't always work as expected, which leads us into like a partial move. So a partial move is where you take some of the content, maybe you move all the lists and document libraries over, and then maybe your users have built some complex workflow in SharePoint Designer that just won't migrate. What you can do is migrate the content and then let them either recreate those workflows, or maybe you can create them with another tool or something like that. But essentially give them access to the content and then let them recreate their workflows. And this is the majority of where I see the things that we migrated fail. And as you migrated sites, I mean, a lot of them went over as is, and we had a really nice forklift migration for many of the sites, but the ones that required the most time and the ones that just we couldn't get going, we ended up doing a partial move for that. And it really just was to let people fix things. And it was, I say SharePoint Designer workflows, nothing wrong with SharePoint Designer workflows, really, but there's things like JavaScripts. Right, so a user might have just downloaded a JavaScript, and they might be like just some random practitioner that's just out of college, and they found a cool tab control that's a JavaScript control. Maybe that works, maybe it doesn't anymore when it migrates. So there's things like that you have to consider for the partial move. Do all the capabilities work, not just the content coming over. And then for most of the minimal amount of things that I've seen might require a rethink or a re-architecture. So this is where you have an extremely customized portal, right? You might have an intranet that's extremely customized and it has things like ISAPI filters over the top, or you're doing some really custom things in there. So you might have to actually re-architect that to support the new capabilities. So maybe it requires a new information architecture, or and it's really kind of focused at the platinum and publishing portals that you might have. Any questions?
You mentioned SharePoint Designer workflows. Are they not migratable then? In fact, there isn't any SharePoint Designer for online, is there?
Yes, they are migratable. Yeah, no, I mean, some of them do migrate, and some of them do okay. The majority of them are questionable at best.
But how would you maintain them anyway? Because there's no tool, is that?
That's right, yeah. So if they do migrate, you need to really test them and see if they work. So yeah, so they, what we ended up doing was we bought a workflow tool that's, it's Nintex. And I'm not endorsing Nintex, it just worked best for us. There's also K2 or whatever. But we ended up buying a workflow tool that allowed our practitioners to still have workflows to own their stuff, but with the same capabilities of SharePoint Designer, just through the browser, so they could do that. And
Quite an expensive option for a lot of people, though, isn't it?
I'm not the money guy, so.
Sorry? Yeah, you see, for most users, that's just not feasible, whereas, of course, designer workflows are really powerful, I think, and effective.
They're powerful, they're very effective, and they do extend the capabilities of your platform to let your users get the solutions they need as opposed to hiring a developer. What we found out is they're just not migratable, right? So, as you move from even SharePoint 2010 to 2013, they broke. And as you move from SharePoint 2013 to either online or 2016, they're great for if that's all you're ever going to use is 2013 or whatever, but as you start to migrate, they don't migrate well.
So 365 basically
Yeah, there's some workflow capability, and
About the out-of-box ones. but that's
right,
very rarely really-
it's a little more limited. Yeah, yeah.
very limited.
Yeah.
SharePoint design is still there. It's still
It's you can. Yeah, you can use SharePoint Designer, but it's a little more. There's a little more limited where you can't reach into things like you could before with some of the things that are available.
So you can still use Designer with online?
Yes.
Oh, right, sorry.
Yeah, you can't things like customizing the UI though. You can't do that. So yeah. Yeah, if you're talking about strictly workflow, yeah, it's there. Some things are limited though, but it's definitely there. Right.
What's the perspective of InfoPath?
Of InfoPath. What's the perspective on InfoPath? So have you seen the roadmap for InfoPath? Right. So let me ask you, what's the roadmap for InfoPath?
I think it's about the same as probably say like SharePoint Designer, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely coming to its end of life, and it works sometimes. Yeah, so that's my perspective on InfoPath, is that it works sometimes. Yeah,
So you're looking to recode those, and they're on custom forms, don't they?
yeah,
So that's another thing. Could be a huge piece of work actually for some organizations.
it could be. Yeah, and that's one of the things. InfoPath was one of the things that bit us in the migration. Yeah, yeah, and it works, but it's even on 2013 though it works sometimes, right? So we found some fields light up, some fields don't. There's some some crazy errors that happen. So that's that.
And during migration, I think business more likely to know as well if you're migrating from on-premises to Office 365, whether the version history or those kind of things will be maintained on Office 365. Because that I know that is possible in on-premises because you just move content databases.
Mhm.
Is this all histories and everything will be maintained on after you move into Office 365 as well?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the migration tool you use, right? So yeah, that is an option. You can bring the version histories over as well. Yeah. So kind of a big complex slide, but basically what it is talking about filtering your site. So you've got at this point in your migration, as we've kind of been talking through it, you've got a huge site list, right? You've got a listing of URLs and site owners and all that kind of stuff. And then what you have to do by talking to users is you have to start classifying that. Is this going to be some kind of out-of-the-box site that we just migrate? Or is it going to be some kind of custom thing? So the site list here on the top here is around just the out-of-the-box or the whole list, right? And then from there you can start classifying of, is this a custom migration? Maybe there's customized features in there that you're going to need a developer, right, on the migration team to actually test these out and fix these things. So the site list, break that up into custom projects. You filter the sites that your users say, you know what, don't migrate this. It's fine. Just delete it. It's not used anymore. And then so you filter the unused sites, filter the handheld migrations, anything that is going to require a developer or a custom team. Filter the BI, BCS sites. Maybe they work, maybe they don't. And then what you get to is the actual migration process, and then that's when the actual migrations take place. As you start to classify these things from the kind of the re-architect all the way down to the kind of the start fresh approach with the slide we just looked at, what you can start to look at is a level of effort. And what this is going to lead to is how long is this migration going to take? And that's a very difficult thing to determine, is how long is the migration going to take? Because once you get into the custom migrations, you might be working on that for 2 or 3 days or trying to migrate that, because it not only takes time for the migration to run, it takes time for it to error off, right? So it may run for 4 hours and be fine, and then something flags it, and then it stops, and then you have to start again, fix that and start again. So things like that is really determining what is the optimal level of effort for this. Okay, so you want to take a picture of that? Knock yourself out. Cool. So enabling the services here. The initial configuration of 365 requires things like your identity management. So are you using ADFS? Are you using with your Active Directory? How are you synchronizing users? How do you assign licenses to users? And this is for the service, right? So this includes Exchange and Link and all of that. And then one of the things that we had to really carefully consider is the administrators group. Is who's going to administer the sites? How's that going to work with your current operations team, right? And one of the things you need to know about being a SharePoint administrator for the SharePoint Online piece is that you have to have the title assigned to you of Global Administrator to manage SharePoint, which means that, excuse me, this same team can manage all of the services in SharePoint or in Office 365. So they have access to get into Exchange or get into Link, the settings for that. So it's kind of a big thing that you have to really carefully consider. These people that traditionally maybe were SharePoint farm administrators also will have SharePoint or will have Exchange admin access, will have Link admin access. So it's something just to know. It caught me off guard, and they're working to fix that. So, but just something for there. Now, as far as the configuration, things to consider, and I'm not going to pull this back over from this. It's just too hard to get things back up here. But things to consider for the SharePoint configuration is, and maybe I can. Let's see. Let me pull this over. There it is. Right. So things to consider for the SharePoint piece. What I've got up here is the actual SharePoint admin panel from the Office 365 tenant that I manage. Is the user profiles, right? What user profile properties are you going to synchronize? How are those going to come over? And does that mean anything from your systems that you're migrating into? So do you have workflows that are dependent on maybe the country code of the user that's synced, right? Things like that. So what information do you actually need in there, and how does that get imported?
I see there's no sync button. How often does it sync?
I think it goes once a day. Is what we've got. Yeah, I can pull the sync. Maybe I'll pull the sync and give you the sync thing. Yeah, it is. Yeah, for us, because the sync's done through FIM for that. Yeah, so you can see we've got just a few users populated in there. Yeah, 414,005 users. Now, I wanted to bring up user profiles because they are important, right? So a lot of times workflows are driven on this. So a lot of the SharePoint Designer workflows or things like that get migrated may be dependent on this. So that feeds into the questions that you have that you need to go to your users and say, are you using any user profile properties to drive workflows, right? So that's kind of a big thing, because if that workflow gets migrated and this profile property is blank, that workflow is going to break when it comes over. Ask me how I know this. So yeah, we ran into that. And from here, we were up here at the user profiles thing. Now we're down at the settings tab. Looking at things like the top navigation user experiences. So you can turn off links or access, not access, but you can turn off the links for OneDrive or Yammer or My Sites here, or they're called sites in 365. So of these things, which do you want enabled? Which do you want disabled? Maybe your company's not ready to roll out Yammer, so you just want to turn that link off so it's hidden from users. So the things like Office Graph, how do you want your enterprise social to work? Do you want to use the Yammer.com or do you want to use the SharePoint newsfeed? Now, we haven't configured Yammer yet. We just launched our tenant. But how do you want to do that? So do you want to turn that on? Probably the biggest thing for us is external sharing, right? Do you want to turn on external sharing, which means that I can share files with people outside of my company, right? Is there legal issues with that? Are there legal issues with that? You definitely have to consider that. And by the way, we're running over at this point, so we'll be fine. I've talked to Steve, and I think he's going to make it up during lunch. So things like that. So external sharing is a big one. Rights management is a big one. How do you want users to provision sites? Right here is how you turn on and off self-site provisioning. Right. So do you want to turn that on? Do you want to turn that off? Where do you want your sites to go? Do you want users to execute custom script on your sites? Do you want to allow them to plop some JavaScript on the site and let them use that? Preview features. Do you want your users to preview features that come out maybe in beta form before Microsoft releases them? So things like that. You want to turn that on or off, maybe turn it off, just so that you get the richest, latest production code ready experience. For that. And let me come back over here and see if I can just
know you're trying to get through your presentation. Just one question you covered at the end if you've got time.
Please.
All these new features that come in with 365. So say you've got anything pre-existing, maybe you've got some customization, maybe you've written, I don't even know if you're allowed to deploy your own written apps to 365, I know so little about it.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when they put in these new features? Do things break?
They could. They could. Yeah.
So you need a staging environment as well. Can they create a copy of your prod environment as a staging one?
That's right. Yeah, you can do it in a site collection. No, they cannot. Yeah, yeah. So it's something you need to. Yeah, as things come out, you need to be on that, right?
I'm
And,
asking like this, so I'm getting up to speed on it.
yeah, no, that's a great question. So did you guys get the question in the back? So the question was, is there a staging environment available for Office or for 365 so that as Microsoft rolls out features, you can test that? And the answer is no. Right? Yeah. And a lot of the things that break are when they roll out. If you use master pages, the preferred way to brand Office 365 is with things called composed looks. They were called themes before, but yeah, composed looks. If you use master pages, a lot of the things that Microsoft pushes out are in the default master page. So things like that could break the changes that roll out. But the new features that roll out could break things as well. But it's rare. It's not something that happens every time. Because keep in mind, they're making updates every week, right? So they're rolling out changes slowly every week.
Is the schedule known or is it not?
Yeah, it's not known. That's right. Yeah.
Does that mean that we don't have any control over this patching? If we say we don't want that particular patch format, we still can't do that because Microsoft is going to patch it anyway.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Welcome to the cloud.
Rob, there is a public page for Microsoft that lists out all the changes and when they're relatively due and what kind of impacts there could be.
There are. There's a page that lists the major changes, but they're rolling out minor changes constantly, right? So the major changes I'm not really worried about. It's the minor ones that could break that I don't know about that are coming. That's what I worry about. Yeah, for that. All right, so as far as preparing, we just talked about this. This is once you have all the information from your users, right? What you want to do is you're going to have some migration tool. There's a bunch of migration tool vendors downstairs. Go talk to them. You'll figure out what you need, what works for you. So what you want to do is obviously procure and confirm the correct setup of the migration tool. And then one of the things you have to do before you start migrations is run test migrations to understand the throughput for how fast can you migrate sites. So of the sites that are out of the box, what's the data transfer rate of that, right? So can you get 1 meg per minute? Can you get 1 gig per minute? What is that? Because as you look at the site sizes, right, you're going to be able to predict how fast you can migrate this, assuming things go to plan, right? So run the test migrations, how much content can be migrated. And then from there, you can create a content migration schedule, which drives the communication plan for your site migration phase. Then you can obviously get the rates and start projecting when you'll be done, right? Because you're not going to know that until you know how fast you can migrate sites. You're not going to know how fast you can migrate sites until you know more information about your sites themselves. So planning for success. When you create your migration plan, and you start running your actual migrations, once you've got your plan in order and you start running the migrations, what we did was we did kind of a slow ramp up. Maybe the first week, we planned to only migrate 10 sites in the first week, right? And we started with sites that we knew would work. We started with sites that were easy. Maybe they were out of the box. And we knew we could get that working so that we could, A, confirm that it would work. And we could also batch that up and then get more information back from the throughput that would drive the site migration schedule back so we can make adjustments. So then from there, the risks, we identify the risks for that, and then how many days per week will you be migrating? So how many number of site collections can you migrate per week? Maybe you're only migrating 4 days per week, or maybe you have a round-the-clock staff that can migrate 7 days per week. And then from there, you'll get your migration schedule and be able to update that accordingly so that's going to drive the communications to your users. Planning your communications should be executive driven, so it should come from the top. It should come, an executive email should come out from whoever the site owner is. Maybe it's the global knowledge management services, or it could be your CIO, or it could be your CEO, or whatever. But basically, inform the users this is about to happen. And obviously, reminder notifications should go out saying, hey, we're going to migrate you in a week, or we're going to migrate you in 3 days, or are you ready? And then one of the things we did was we used Yammer as a support channel. And as migrations went, and because we had we had thousands of sites, right? We couldn't just get on the phone with all those users. What we did was we said, hey, if you have any problems, go out to this Yammer group, and we were monitoring this Yammer group and be able to respond quickly and jump on with people that had issues. Your team, how does your team need to look? Do you need a developer? Do you need business people? Do you need a dedicated migration team? So the developer typically is there to support the custom coding issues you might have where something that worked in your previous site doesn't work now. They can identify that and quickly help resolve that, because it could be something the user dropped in, right? It could be a JavaScript that some user dropped into the page that maybe doesn't work, and that user's no longer with that team or with your company anymore, and nobody knows how to support it or what it did or how to get it to work. So the migration team manages the migration schedule, monitors the site collections as they're getting migrated, and also roll back any site collections to on-premises if migrations break. Not all your migrations are going to go 100% every time. So you might have some that linger for 2 or 3 days or maybe weeks, right, as you're starting to resolve issues to get those over there. So the migration team is going to manage that communications back with whoever owns that site so that they can communicate with their users. Create a working smart guide for users. So overview of the SharePoint Online process. Users, at the end of the day, they don't really care. To them, the on-premises sites are really in the cloud. They don't care that it's in SharePoint Online. But there are some things that are different, right? So if they're heavy SharePoint Designer users or something like that, maybe you communicate the differences in what you could do before and what you do today. So managing things like managing workflows, managing InfoPath forms, or just frequently asked questions. So as far as key takeaways from the session here, as we talked, and sorry to have to rush at the end, but we're running short on time, but so understand the features of Office 365 and how you intend to use them. We talked about that. How are you going to work with the challenges of moving to the cloud and all being prepared for that? Because that's the migration piece is the biggest piece of preparing for the cloud, both from a technical and a business side. What does your current versus future state look like? So what does your current on-premises look like, and what does your future online and on-premises state look like? What configuration changes do you need to make to Office 365? And also have a good solid migration plan. So be able to communicate that, talk to your users, and really create that plan to get those sites moved. So thank you guys for attending today. And any questions, just feel free to ping me.